It's my pleasure to welcome a longtime friend of the DEG, Mike Fiddler, the 8K Association's Executive Director. Mike?
Well, good morning, everybody. I see the sun is finally out. That's a good sign. If I can ask the panelists to head up to the stage. So our panel is made up of, as Mark said, industry experts, and it really provides great insight as we see, relatively nascent technology like 8K starting to develop and evolve. And certainly it's at its early stages, but there is so much going on behind the curtain that most of you now will get an opportunity to see and hear and realize. First I have Jonathan from Amazon Studios. Sitting next to Jonathan is Greg from IMAX, and then we have Lauren from RED. And if I could ask each of you to describe a little bit about your company, although I think most of you know about their companies, but also your role within your company.
Hi, Jonathan Lee, Head of Media Engineering and Innovation at Amazon Studios. I think we know what Amazon Prime Video does. My team is responsible for designing and building post-production workflow and infrastructures for the studio. We also run an innovation program. We have a media lab at the Amazon Studios in Culver City. And there we seek to simplify the vast technology stack for our visual storytellers to give them new capabilities and make it easier for them to make films in new and better ways.
Awesome. Greg?
Yeah, Greg Ciaccio. I'm the Senior Director of Original Content Post-Production at IMAX, and I'm responsible for all of our original content that we produce or co-produce, as well as all the anything shot on film. So any of the blockbusters you see that are still shot on 65mm cameras that we have. I also help on other initiatives like IMAX Enhanced, Filmed at IMAX, and IMAX Live.
I'm Lauren Simons. I've Red Digital Cinema. I started Red Digital Cinema as a motion picture technology advisor, so I would work with our highest end DPs, colorists, directors, all the on-set creative folks, and really sort of educating them about why 8K. I've had a lot of conversations about what is 8K, why do I need it, is it sharp, is it, is it really an unburdened, kind of resolution to shoot in. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the strifes with this discussion around 8K and its relevance. But Red has been making 8K sensors since about 7 years ago. We've made 5 different 8K sensors in the last 7 years, with our latest one being 8K 120 frames and a 4-pound body. So we're very familiar with the 8K world and really how to present this to the creatives and make sure that everyone understands how it can power their process.
Thank you. That's a great kind of intro. And what I'd like to do now is give each of the panelists about 3 minutes or so just to discuss specific elements within their work element. And I'll start with Lauren. And Lauren, so right now, how are leading DPs using Red Cinema 8K cameras to help bringing the vision of the director to life?
Yeah, so it's definitely changed over the last 7 years we've been doing this. I mean, the initial conversation was around acquiring an 8K and delivering in 4K for a high-fidelity 4K finished project. There are benefits from going to 8K to 4K, oversampling benefits for noise averaging, for smoothness, for color fidelity. But we've seen in the last couple of years discussions around actual 8K delivery now that we've got some really nice 8K viewing environments that everyone on the panel can talk about here. So that shift has been really good to see, and it also brings up this whole discussion about remastering. People who've been capturing on our cameras, again, for almost a decade now, can revisit their camera original footage and remaster for a one-to-one native 8K viewing environment, which is super, super exciting. I always try to describe to people that, 8K is not some sort of high-clarity, sharpened, processed image that sort of people are always concerned about when they hear about these higher resolutions. But if you think about it, you give a 4x4 grid and you try to draw a circle on that, you're going to get a square every time. It's not going to be a faithful reproduction of that circle. But give me an 8x8 grid, you can now draw a circle and you can see that, the smoothness almost. I try to orient the conversations. Sharpness is nice for some markets, but I try to orient it around a faithful reproduction, being able to reproduce curves, faces, much environments now. You know, our bread and butter since our founding has been cinema, but we now have a new product called Red Connect, which allows us to stream over IP our 8K raw footage from our cameras, either via Ethernet or fiber, and then we can feed that into a CCU. It can be decoded directly on an NVIDIA GPU, and that brings us to this whole new market of live sports broadcasting, VR headsets. So there are these new markets that really leverage 8K. I mean, just thinking about broadcast environment, for example, if you can, you can capture 8K 120 frames while still broadcasting a 60p 8K image or a 4K image over SDI, that is, and then have an instant replay of 120 frames directly from that same camera position, or you can go this fiber route that we're talking about and go 8K fiber to a truck, and then once you get into that GPU space, the options are boundless. I mean, you can do really anything with footage once you're in that 8K live space on the GPU. So extracting 4K for multiple camera positions or regioning things, you can really do a lot in that space for the broadcast world. But we're also seeing in like the VR headset space, that's a really critical environment for high resolution, both panels and imagery. I mean, there's nothing more critical than a panel that's sitting a couple inches away from your eyes. And so as those panels get better and better, and you suspend this with this, sort of, I'm viewing a monitor, I'm seeing pixels. Once that sort of goes away with this fine pixel pitch, having the footage to work with that is really critical. And we can do, actually from our cameras, we've had clients put them back to back, 8K live from both cameras on wide angle lenses, and have them stitched live in a CCU, so you're in a 360 VR headset environment from two 8K live feeds anywhere in the world. It's super exciting for live sports, music, anything like that.
Oh, that's great. I know that there's so many kind of advantages that now, as the DPs learn what they can do, because it's kind of providing a little more headroom and giving them opportunities to explore what kind of advantages. As you said, I think sports as well. I know that even in the recent Super Bowl, they were using an 8K camera for their capture of replay to make sure they could get the fidelity of the image that they're seeing. And that so leads very much into what you just talked about. This is not just for movies, but it really expands to sports, to music, as well as to VR applications and beyond.
Yeah, and we actually have a live demo of that in the exhibition floor of 8K live to a 8K display. So.
Yeah, please. Now I'd like to ask Jonathan. Jonathan, Amazon has made a huge commitment to 8K with new Culver theaters as well as the 8K mixing stage. Can you tell us a little bit about these ventures?
Yeah, we've been busy the last couple of years. Some of you folks might have been at the launch for Stage 15, our new state-of-the-art virtual production stage. And now we're about to, we took over the Culver, actually it was the ArcLight Theater in Culver City during the pandemic when exhibition wasn't doing so well. And we've, behind the scenes, been refurbishing the theater and putting new tech in there and also building out a post-production facility. And there's a couple of world's first there, one of which is the first 8K post-production dub stage and DI stage, and as well, the world's first 8K exhibition stage. So it's an 11-screen complex of all Atmos sound systems. And I think what we were talking about earlier was this new palette and why 8K, it's more pixels, why 8K high dynamic range? Well, it's a new palette for the artist, and it gives you the ability to create in more realistic formats and even create hyper-realism in some ways. And that's really, in a way it's experimental. For instance, we're sort of ahead of the curve with distribution packaging and server formats and IMBs and that crazy stuff. But when we did see how 8K looked in high dynamic range, and specifically in large format, it was a bit mind-bending. And not to get too technical, but if you look at what we did with over the last few years of HDR, and specifically what we have with perceptual quantizer, and more or less, in a long story short, it's a transfer function that takes the digital code values that we capture on camera And it gives a standard way to translate them that models the response of the human visual system. And why I'm saying this is that when you're in the theater, that high dynamic range transfer function gives you enough range so that your pupil will iris like it does in nature when you're outside. And that's something that we're not used to in a theater, where you have enough light that moves your pupil. And that's really where it becomes disorienting when you combine 8K imagery with the high dynamic range transfer function. It's a little disorienting because your brain is responding like you're outside, but you're actually looking at an artificial display system. It's a bit of a dizzying effect, but when we first experienced that, we realized that this is a new experience for people to have out in the theater that's different than anything they've experienced before. And that's really what we're starting to explore, creating some 8K content, and really we're excited about bringing this to the industry and having other people experience this extraordinary exhibition format.
Yeah, you know, I actually went to the theater a couple of weeks ago, and for those that have not gone there, it is open to the public. They're running conventional movie schedules, but you really need to go and see what kind of impact this has in the viewing experience. It is remarkable. It's intense because it gives you that realism that you don't get in a traditional theater with traditional projection and other issues that are related to projection. But yeah, I urge all of you, if you have an opportunity, to go see the Culver theaters, and that will continue to evolve and continue to really start to drive a new way for people to get that real true experience of going to the theater. So looking forward to that expansion.
There's a great bar there too. I've been doing quality control on it recently.
That helps as well. Yeah. So Greg, IMAX is bigger is better. So what is IMAX going to do to take full advantage of what 8K can deliver?
Yeah, so at IMAX, we've been, for about over 50 years, very concerned with high quality. Our images are very highly immersive. For those of you who haven't seen a 65mm film frame, it's quite large. The documentaries actually that we're showing here over at the gallery next door, take a look at them. I think you'll be surprised. Some of these documentaries are over 30 years old, and they look quite amazing. A lot of people have actually looked at those 8K images and said, I've never seen 8K images that look that good. Well, yes, when you start out with a very high quality image, then you get there. So high quality, highly immersive is very important to IMAX, both in theatrical and in the home. If you look at the picture aspects these days, right, you've got color volume, you've got dynamic range, you've got spatial resolution, right? So we all know we're P3 heading towards full 2020. That's our goal. We've got dynamic range. A lot of the new digital cameras exceed 13 stops. So we're getting there with HDR displays, and your theater at Amazon. We're hyper-real. We're getting to the point where if you want to experience hyper-real, we're there. Spatially, however, we're not there. We're getting there. 8K is fantastic. I think if you've got all of those pixels, why not use them? But let's take a look at some of the other picture aspects people have been worried about. HDR. How many people show of hands, love HDR and have seen it at home? How about theatrically? Okay, so just because you have HDR doesn't mean it has to be bright all the time, right? I think we've all kind of realized that. HDR is so much about the shadow detail too, right? So a lot of it is just kind of our sensibilities and how we want to present that. Same with color volume. If you're working on a Pixar movie and you want to show a deep crimson red or a green you've never seen before, why not be able to do that? You don't have to. And it's the same thing. Just because, to Lauren's point, just because you have 8K doesn't mean all your images have to be crystal sharp clear with sharp edges. You use that as a palette. If you wanted to have an old 16mm or a low-com look, do that. But unless you have the 8K, unless you have these limits, you can't achieve that. The other thing I will mention, besides theatrical with 8K displays, right, you're dealing with emissive LED displays that are, in the 1.2-ish, millimeter pixel pitch. It's fixed, right? So you're not bound. It's not an 8K TV, right? It's a 33-foot wide or 40-foot wide, and that happens to be 8K. Now, in an IMAX size, it'll even be bigger. So the resolution is super important. At home, 85 is the new 65, right? Or 75, depending on what you've got in your room. So, your couch isn't going further back all the time. We're at the point, we're not dealing with picture heights, right? Your couch is staying in the same place, your TV's getting bigger, and you're more immersive. You're watching better, more immersive quality at home, and that's really what IMAX is about.
For our facility project at Wilbur Theater, and that is, for a long time, the best pixels have been in home streaming with high dynamic range, things like HDR10, HDR10 Plus, Dolby Vision. And our theatrical pixels actually, if you look at it objectively, convey less color and dynamic range and less contrast. And now what we've done in our facilities, we have a number of, we have 6 theaters open to the public, 6 of which are emissive micro LED. There's 4 4K, and then there's the new 8K theater. And the big difference is now we can still convey traditional or conventional DCI pixels, but now we can also do high dynamic range pixels. Now the thing that most folks haven't experienced, even at 4K, let alone 8K, is actual pixel for pixel rendition in large format. When we use projection, the light, first of all, the screen's white, so there's the black is never really black, and so the contrast is not perfect. And then also, even if you have a 4K projector, the light, you have a perf screen, and not all of the light comes back to you that you're sending at the screen. And the other thing that happens is there's just some texture on the screen itself. So when the light hits the screen, there's always diffusion. So it's always, the look is, even if it's perfectly in focus, it's still soft. It's still beautiful. We love film, we love projection. It's a palette, it's its own medium that's absolutely gorgeous in its own aesthetic. But when we're using these emissive displays, you actually have pixel for pixel rendition of whatever the source master was. And I'm telling you, you have not lived until you've seen 4K and 8K content that's that sharp. It's just stunningly beautiful, and it's just a new palette that we're just now exploring at scale. So we're really excited about that. And it's another reason for people to really experience the world and get out of their living rooms and just have some great community interaction as well, that I think we've all been missing for a while.
And I'm not here to obviously advocate LED emissive theatrical exhibition over projection. However, I will say, that I mean, I'd love to see a world where you can have that 24 frame with motion blur, 180 shutter, have it feel filmic, and maybe there's a point in the story where it snaps into some sort of hyper-real thing where you actually want to feel like you're involved in that, right? So to me, that makes a lot of sense, and you need these technologies to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the discussion about HDR and where we're telling stories, telling them in the shadows is really important. This whole, HDR when it was first coming out, it had a little bit of the 3D buzz, and people were a little concerned about, oh, it's a gimmick or something. But I think it was because people were looking at images that were shown in 1,000 nits that didn't need to be shown in 1,000 nits. Telling the story in the shadows is something that we're all very passionate about, and the emissive displays do an excellent job of that as well. And I think, understanding that noise floor is really, really important, not just this highlight protection or whatnot, because you're not really telling the story up there. You're telling it in your mid-tones, you're telling it in your shadows, and I think properly created HDR stuff that really takes advantage of that new range is really immersive, and it's definitely the future.
And it's another tool for that immersion. At IMAX currently today, if you've seen an IMAX movie, Dune or whatever, you have these aspect ratio changes, right? So you could have a widescreen scene or shots, and then it can open up, and when it does that, it pulls you into the movie, right? So here's just another technique, another way to achieve that.
Yeah, and I think what you've been talking about with the cameras, that's such an important part of the process, is just maximizing the imagery that you're capturing, and that's so important. We've been working a lot with Red and other camera companies. There have been a lot of breakthroughs. One of the things that's really interesting that those guys have been working on is the ability to, in real time, view an 8K full-res camera file, debayering full-res, and that's something, if any of the production folks out here have experienced not seeing what you've actually captured in the camera raw file, but now being able to do that at full resolution in real time is it's an incredible breakthrough. So yeah, really happy that you guys have brought that out.
Yeah, I mean, that comes down to sort of one of the fundamental principles about Red. We've always been a raw capture company. we prioritize raw capture because of this future-proofing, remastering. You know, every raw frame can be reprocessed now with, you know, advancements in our debayers and advancements in our other image processing. You can always reprocess this stuff as if, you know, Red 1, you're saying you shoot on your Red 1. You can send Red 1 raw footage through our latest IPv2 pipeline, and we have improvements in there and things that will revitalize that 4K that you shot in 2009, and will, you know, then you can upres it to 8K, and it will look even better than the initial that you just captured in some intermediary formats and baked there.
Yeah, I mean, please go next door if you can at some point and take a look at the AK Association booth. And I think you'll agree that the images that you'll see are pretty spectacular. And just to think that when these images were created, HDR wasn't something people were talking about, right? So to your point, we're taking these images, some of them that you'll see are 38 years old. They look spectacular, and now we're having new life in these images through HDR.
No, I mean, all of those points are really well taken, because the goal is really elevating the experience, really creating more emotion, creating more impact. And through all of the development efforts that are taking place, both from the capturing side and the creativity behind both the DP and the director, and trying to create a story and trying to tell that story through all the tools that exist to them, to obviously displaying it and making sure you have the right distribution elements to do that, as well as, of course, with getting this big experience in the theater, as well as at home. It's certainly important to make sure that we create the best experience for consumers, the best theatrical, as well as the best home experience. And so it's an important part of the equation.
You hit the nail on the head. It's really about bringing the storytellers closer to their audience, and kind of looping back to the little technical thing I was talking about, the transfer functions. That's significant in that, at least when you look at our 8K theater and producing content in high dynamic range 8K, so it's officially a new cinema format, because we built a cinema and you can watch things in that format there. So the thing is, we're telling now the same story. You can tell, at least the storytellers can tell the same story across all the platforms, because they're using the same pixels to deliver theatrically and for streaming. And that's something it's a little bit of a nuanced difference than what we've had in the past, where, you know, usually the biggest picture is the hero format for the filmmakers in the case of theatrical, P3 DCI master, which again, you know, it's not HDR. So that's what one of the aims was, to bring our audiences and our storytellers closer together, and that they're getting the same story in the same format across our different delivery platforms. And that's part of the experiment with it, and really just to again shrink the distance between the story and the audience.
So, you know, I wanted to also ask, as we see now that, you know, there's honestly not a lot of 8K content being delivered into the home, but there is a lot of 8K content being captured natively. So what does that have as an influence to the consumer marketplace itself? You're starting to build these repositories, and so how does that affect, you know, from a business perspective, what you guys are doing?
Yeah, listen, we're, you know, the early days, right? We're on an on-ramp, right? Not everyone has the bandwidth to get that. And, you know, for those of you who listen, I've had the same kind of concerns or issues. Is how do we get high-quality 8K to your home? Well, many of you, who has speeds out there over 100 meg to your home? Well, that's a lot of you, okay? So imagine we're at the point where you've got a ladder, right, an encoding ladder, and you can accept 5 megabits, 20 megabits, 50. If you can take that 70 or that 80, why not have it? You know, tomorrow everyone's going to have it. Frontier will be installing it across the street from you one day. So you know, we're building this ecosystem, so we have the material today, and it's not so far in the distance. It's really tomorrow. They just put the fiber in my neighborhood like a couple weeks ago. So you know, we got to get that there. We got to get it. We've got to get the material processed. We've got to get it archived. We have to work in the highest quality that we can in the mastering phase, and not work in what we call display space, right? We're working in scene linear mastering space, not knowing what the limitation. We want to assume there's no limitation on the back end.
Yeah, and from the business perspective, the pushback that I get internally is that, okay, so 8K is 4 times the data of 8K is 4 times the data of 4K, and that will cost it requires more processing time and more storage, which those are more or less true. But you know, a lot of cameras that are 8K, folks, even if they're saying, oh, well, we're just doing 4K, they're still capturing in 8K. That many cinema cameras, if you're exposing the full sensor, you're capturing 8K even if you're only going to use 4K of that. So we're sort of, more folks are probably already capturing in 8K or higher already. So there's that aspect of it. And we are looking at, you know, I think part of what will get us out of this is Moore's Law. So every 18 months things get, technology is half the cost and twice as fast, you know, which is sort of a semi-truism. But yeah, we're looking at how can we, you know, from perspective of production and post-production, work in these new formats and not actually make the process cost more. And that's what we're endeavoring to do at Amazon. And we hope to share a lot of that process with other folks that want to work in these formats.
Yeah, and compression will play a large part of it as well. You know, keeping the file size down with compression, whether it's in-camera raw compression or it's, you know, downstream compression, working with offline media, things like that. I mean, we and our clients have been dealing with 8K for a long time in terms of their storage space, and it is something that we always hear on, and it just depends on what your environment looks like. I mean, we have many people who capture 8K images at relatively high compression ratios, and it's fine because they're, you know, the delivery format is at either in the past they were delivering in 4K or even just, you know, this large format 8K viewing environment. Like, it's a little bit more acceptable for some of the compression, but of course it just depends on where you're going to be viewing it.
Yeah, and it's always a balance, right? We've got compression is getting better, right? The spatial resolution and the color fidelity, all that keeps going up to balance that out, but we have better bandwidth of the home. So it's always a dance. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got to start out with these high quality images. And the other thing I'll say is we're not counting pixels or counting lines anymore. That was yesterday, right? We would go up and say, can I see the lines? If I can't see the lines, that's as good as it gets. That's not true, right? We all, I think, know that now. There's something that happens after line counting that just is this subjective thing that brings you closer into it. And when you haven't seen it, you don't know it. But when you're seeing these images every single day, like we are, you start noticing it. You start getting more attuned to it, and then you can see the difference. Or if you can't see the difference, you can feel the difference.
Yeah, and I haven't shown a line per pixel height chart for a long time because people it's not what people care about anymore. They believe the resolving power is there. This is not, you know, talking about Bayer patterns and understanding what your actual output resolution is and what can you resolve, because we're past that effectively. I mean, people, cinematographers, creatives are dulling down images to look for softer, you know, line blurring and things like that, and that's totally within their realm to do. That's the creative process. But again, still, even if you're shooting with a black chromist filter in front of an 8K sensor, you're still capturing the subtleties of those curves better than you would if you were shooting on a 4K data sensor or even HD data sensor. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we were having people saying HD is enough in the region, in this market, and we were talking about 8K, you know, so HD is enough, but we really felt that 8K was a future trajectory, and I mean, 7 years ago, we faced an uphill battle talking about 8K, but we were resolute that was the direction of the industry, and you know, we were the first ones with an 8K camera out there, and we definitely have the widest variety of them now.
I mean, that's a lot of information, but there's also, you can see a lot of enthusiasm for what 8K can provide as we move ahead, as we move to bring more of an immersive experience, more of an emotional experience, and more value to the customer, wherever they are, whether they're in the theater or whether they're at home. So all of these gentlemen and the companies they work for are really elevating that activity, driving that equation, and so hopefully you got great insights into what's happening on the 8K side and creating that new way. So I think we have maybe some time for
One or two questions from the audience? Yes?
Do you have any data about how the Olympics came off in 8K and how many screens were watched? Because I know NHK made a big deal about broadcasting the Tokyo Olympics in 8K.
Question is around the Tokyo Olympics, shot and captured in 8K by NHK. And I don't know if anyone panel has specific
I
experience.
don't have any data about it. I mean, I know last year here at Entech, there was a display from Intel that had the Olympics coverage from Tokyo, and for those that saw it, it was spectacular. I can't tell you about the actual viewing side of that equation, and mostly in NHK, in the Japanese domestic market.
And there are a number of people from Intel here at Entech Fest. You may want to check with them. They're all over the exhibit area doing presentations, meetings. Any other questions from anybody? Come to you, Michael. Yes.
Rick
Fred?
You've talked about resolution and color gamut and dynamic range. You didn't hit the other one, which is frame rate. I was wondering if you could address that.
Question about frame rate as it relates to 8K.
Thanks, Greg.
This is just a setup.
Actually, frame rate is an important picture aspect, obviously. You know, who's seen Avatar? Those of you who haven't, you can leave the room. No, obviously, frame rate is a very important aspect of that as well. And with HDR images, you get more judder. And we understand that, so companies like Pixelworks are out there. They're here as well, next door, and working to combat that issue. And so that we're very sensitive to that issue as well. And so things like motion grading are super important. So thanks for bringing that up, Greg.
The display systems that we have in the theater, especially the 8K, we can go up to do 8K at 60 frames. So we are experimenting with different ways to manage against some of the temporal luminance artifacts.
And in classic red fashion, we are one step ahead, and we're shooting 8K 120 on our new Super 35 or our large format 8K sensors. So we're trying to always keep it ahead.
This gentleman has a question? Yes.
Yeah, so data and storage and transmission and streaming scared the crap out of me with 8K, right? That's one of the big technical challenges. You talk about compression. Are they doing anything? Is there anything that anybody's working on as far as creativity, like using AI, for instance? I'll give you an example, right? Like, let's say there's a stream of just a simple video across the country. Instead of sending the actual bits, people have talked about using AI to only send bits that are necessary, and AI generates images that will complete the image. And there's no difference or seen difference to the observer, the consumer. You guys fiddle around with any of that? And again, this stuff is just like total future kind of things, but.
I can't speak about what we're doing with our experimental encoding.
So yes.
Literally no comment.
No comment. Does anyone in the audience here have solutions that represent what he's talking about? Because if you, or maybe you guys can get together afterwards and chat about it.
Isn't that just the next generation of bit mapping?
Well, I mean, bit mapping is a very specific thing with imagery. I mean, I guess you could use that as an analogy. I mean, I think what the other question was getting at was, what can we do to get visually lossless compression? And I think that's really what the question is. That's what the aim is. So however we arrive at that, what we want to do is have the image that's conveyed through streaming be the same as the master imagery that we use to make the encode with. So that's, I think we all, any streamer or camera company, et cetera, endeavors to do that.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank Mike and his panelists for a great session.